Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We have the Union Finance Minister, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, with us this afternoon. And many people would ask Ms. Sitharaman that your budget preceded a very, very toughly fought election. Now that the BJP has squarely lost this election, was it ever about the budget, or is it the budget which has not been supported by the people?
You're talking about the Delhi elections?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, this is about a budget for the country. Why would you want to reduce it to only Delhi elections?
So you're going to win all states after this?
Every state has its own budget too. Would you want to assess the state and their budgets rather than pitch national budget each time for a state's election?
So I want to ask you, many people have been talking about the growth rate, the GDP numbers, and the topic of conversation in most drawing rooms, in most newsrooms, in most offices is, God, dhanda nahi chal raha hai, yaar, kuch karo. Do you see that sentiment really changing?
Since, let us say, August, the Prime Minister at his level, ministry at our level, all of us have been engaging with various sections. Some sections have had very severe challenges, there's no denying that. And some other sections knew where the relief lies for them. And we've been attending to all of them. And at least like the way I quoted in the parliament, there are clear signs of recovery in some sectors and consistent recovery in our GST revenue generation also. So I'm sure, yes, there's a turnaround.
Which are the sectors where you are able to see green shoots already? And how much time do you think it's going to take for the sentiment to return back and some sort of robust numbers to come out?
Well, if I do say that this particular sector I can see recovery, somebody else would, no, not that. But very clearly, the Purchase Managers Index, which I quoted in the parliament, and also when we went around with the banks to extend credit to the retail sector, a lot of them have seen uptick in retail. Also, when people have now started booking homes back again, or even buying ready to occupy homes rather than wait for its construction, there is a bit of a relief you can see in that sector also. MSMEs have been given new lease of life and from various different angles. Those who are stressed, those who are NPAs, differently also given a relief. So there are definitely signs of positivity in many such areas. So I would only broadly say so, but sector-wise figures I might have to wait for some time more.
Nirmala Sitharaman, people say that unemployment is at the highest rate, at 6.1%. It has been the highest rate that we've recorded in the last 4 decades. Many people say that your government was in denial about these numbers when they came in before the Lok Sabha elections, but you accepted the same report in toto post the elections. Is there an attempt somewhere to brush under the carpet the real challenge that unemployment really poses to this government and to this country? And of course, in the absence of employment, is that why consumer expenditure is at a low, which in turn is creating its own pressures on the economy?
Well, on the employment, I think, again, in my parliament reply, I've quoted 6 different indicators through which we are showing that employment is happening. But yet, in India, there's no denial that comprehensive data for both formal sector employment and informal sector employment is absent. You do not have a comprehensive picture. If you have some picture for formal sector, it is somewhat for some segments within the formal sector. If you have some information for informal, it is again only a part picture. As a result, all of us definitely can seek comfort of our own data, own meaning not that we generate, but one such data and say it's going up or it's coming down. Now, if EPFO data is being used by the government for proving that newer employment is happening, some would say, oh, that's only a small segment. That's true too, it is a small segment. But yet it is new job registration. Why will somebody go for a PFO registration, new ones, if new employment's not happening? Similarly, I can always talk about Mudra loan-seeking people, not the ones who are already in business, but also those who are new. So like that, patchy may not be the right word, partial information on formal and informal data is available in India. At any point in time, you can always bank on it. But is it sufficient to get a complete picture of employment per se in the country? No, it's not. None of which is complete. So there is going to be this continuing debate, and all of us will have to keep talking about it. But there is a need, therefore, to understand how we can get better picture of employment in this country. And with that said, if government chose not to release, let us say, one of them, on the ground that the data is questionable, the way in which it was collected or whatever, if that is the answer for a particular set of data, it is a genuine concern that if the methodology or if the collection process was faulty, the government should be able to stand up and say, sorry, it was faulty, I'm not giving. But that does not mean that every data of the government is questionable. But the government should have the honesty, and it did have the honesty, and we had the honesty to say, sorry, in this, there is a problem, so they are not being released. But that doesn't immediately mean that you can say that the government is hesitating to release every data related to, let us say, employment, let us say, growth, and so on. So there are particular times when you have to own up that things have not been collected perfectly. So that's the long and short of.
Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, you and your government say that you're a government in touch with the common man, with the Aam Aadmi, with the people on the ground. If that is the situation, in the absence of any reliable data on employment, do you still think that unemployment is not an issue for this country and that everything is hunky-dory?
Not at all. Did I say that everything is hunky-dory? Did I say employment is not a critical criteria for, let's say, the common citizen? Not at all. And we are coming out with figures to show where it is happening and where you need to do more. There's no deny at all. I find it obviously, I may take this opportunity to say, of late, the criticism is you're not owning up to certain issues the way in which I want you to own up. The government is in denial because it's not saying whether the economy is in a cyclical or is it in a structural, or is it in a stagnation. Well, each one would want me to say the way in which he would want me to say. And if I don't, government is in denial.
Is this he reference to Rahul Gandhi or Mr. P. Chidambaram?
To everybody. But the question is, denial if I am in, or if the government is in a denial mode, from July to February, there are people who tell me you presented a budget every weekend, which means I've been acting on it, which means the government is responding to a lot of issues on which people want support, on which the government is expected to react. So I won't be working in that intensity and that pace if I'm in, sitting and watching mode. So this word denial seemed to be a very potent word to throw at the government's doorsteps. And I don't use certain jargons, I don't use certain, terminology which people want me to use, but that doesn't mean that I'm not working. I'm acting on things.
Nirmala Sitharaman, many people say, and this comes up from opposition states, that they've given their charter of demands as far as the state share in funds are concerned. The center is sitting on it, and which is why they say that no longer is India a federation of states, it is really the center's whip that is put on states, and even the money actually due to them is not being given out. The Congress states have come out with that criticism, and Mamata Banerjee, Chief Minister of West Bengal. What would you want to say to them?
I fully understand states speaking like that. But there are two things we have to take cognizance of when we are discussing this issue. As per the formula of devolution, states will have to get a share. And that is the share from the pool which is collected from the revenue that is coming through taxation. The tax revenue is collected and the divisible pool from where I give it to the states as per a formula. If the revenue collection itself has gone down, of course the portion which goes to the state will be lesser. That's nothing to do with me saying, hey, I don't like XYZ states, so I won't give. Never. It can't happen like that. So that is one side of the story. The other is, as per the GST law, when it was introduced, it was agreed that a 14% share will be given as compensation over and above what you have collected in case the total after devolution you find that the states are not able to have that level which was predetermined based on 15-16 base year, I think, you give the 14%. Now there has been a delay in giving the 14% compensation and we are running late in giving it timely. Now that is a different side of the story. I've stood up in Parliament in July during the budget session and subsequently on several questions I've stood up and said, look, as per the collection, this is all that I have. And if I have to give you 14%, as it comes I can give, but there was a time when in 2 years we had collected some surplus. And that is the point now, this year there are no surplus. But in that surplus, whatever is left over, I'm drawing that out and also giving that also completely to the states. So the delay is because of the compensation cess not being adequate to pay up for the 14% which has been committed. That's committed. Devolution is committed. As per that, I have to give. There cannot be any tweaking here. The formula is given by the finance commissions and the formula is given by the GST Act. The compensation at 14% and the devolution as per the devolution formula. So there cannot be something which I can sit and do subjectively saying I can't give the states. But if the revenue collection itself has fallen, obviously the share quantum will come down.
So let me ask you, is the government broke? Are the government coffers really at a low level? Because we've seen that in this time of recession, many people expected consumer expenditure to be increased from the government side. You've bothered more about staying in the zone of safe fiscal deficit rather than increasing it and putting more money in people's hand. States are crying for their funds. Is it the GST itself, the collection process, which is a problem? Is it the slowdown? And is the government really broke?
I have said about the GST collection. And in fact, September and October 19 was when there was a dip in the collection. But subsequently, December, January have had positive collection. In fact, November, December and January, 3 months, if I remember the number is correct, 7, 9 and 12% increase each month when you compare it with the previous, such a month in the previous year. November with November, December with December and so on. So, and we've crossed 1 lakh limit all these 3 months and steadily the 3 months more than 1 lakh has been collected. So revenue generation has improved. GST revenue means revenue from businesses, commercial activities, transactions which are commercial and so on. So that itself indicates that if in September and October it had dipped and now it's gone up, it means commercial activity, economic activity is back again on its feet. So now my question is about the revenue being collected, now being distributed, the government not spending. Absolutely untrue. My capital expenditure has gone up between April to November, 22%. So if the economy, again, I borrow my own words, which I said in Lok Sabha, if the economy has to have all the four engines moving forward. Public investment is being kept up. I'm saying 22% rise between April and November. And in order to increase consumption in people, whether it is PM Kisan, whether it is Manrega, whether every other direct benefit transfer, I'm pushing money. Direct benefit transfer, it goes. I'm again making sure that public sector banks are all going forward to give credit to people who want it. MSMEs, big businesses, retail, private consumption, money is being given through the banks. Now, Reserve Bank also. I'm really repeating my words. I'm very grateful to the Reserve Bank. It just didn't look at it as monetary policy, monitoring and regulatory authority, and just dealt with interest rate. It came out of that just interest rate monitoring as being their primary business and said, no, we'll also participate in making sure the growth happens. They've relaxed on the credit reserve ratio that banks should have so that more funds are given for real estate, for home buyers, and so on. So they've reduced the rate, and they've also told banks, look, if you have commitments because of committed fixed deposit rate of interest that you have to give, and therefore you can't lend far lesser than that, borrow from me, borrow from the Reserve Bank at policy rate, which is even probably lesser than the repo rate, and then lend to people. So credit is moving. So we are in sync, both of us, Reserve Bank and the ministry, the government, are all pushing avenues forward for people to have more credit in their hand, more money in their hand, so consumption is being taken care of. I'm giving enough promotion for exports. So the four engines that you talk about constantly, public investment, private consumption, and exports, are all being given a push. Otherwise, why will you have the green shoots? So the government is acting, revenue is improving. That's the story.
Well, on banking reforms, many people say that the entire liquidity crunch, credit crunch that we are talking about is actually a crunch of psychological warfare that is going on. In 2014, when your government came, it went after all the corrupt practices or corrupt practices in inverted commas that had happened in the previous government. And all the stories about the Vijay Mallya's and various other investors and industrialists came out. And banks say that the punitive action that was taken at that time has made most of these bank officials go into a shell because they're always looking over their shoulder. Are they going to be booked by the CBI for a decision they've taken prima facie, which is not malified? Is that the psychological issue or the barrier that needs to be broken?
Banks did have this hesitation. You're right. There was this sense of what happens if I take a commercially sound decision, but yet in the future sometimes something happens and this account fails, will I be pulled up? In fact, I've had quite a few meetings with banks, and in one such a meeting I've had the CBI director, 2 joint directors who deal with banks also be present there. And we looked at the entire process of how this happens. No case can go to the CBI unless the banks themselves choose to have it sent. If there is a problem in the bank about a particular account, the banks are well within, they have enough rules and empowered banks, all banks are empowered to that extent to take action on it. It is only when they think it's beyond them, it's only when they think it involves maybe monies which are otherwise doubtful in their origin, do they have to refer the case to eventually to the CBI. But this process goes through a filtering mechanism where now we've appointed a CVC-based committee which look at which of these cases are vigilance related and which are not. But before it comes to this group to look at, banks themselves will have to take a call, and which has been the case all the while, that whether this case should go to a vigilance inquiry at all. Now, after all, therefore, did the CBI go on its own? No, the banks decide to send it to the CBI. And after which, if you tell me, CBI is after me, you have decided taken a considered view to send it to the CBI. Now, all right, after it goes to the CBI, and if CBI is going to follow up with even some officials in the bank, then is the question, they'll have to seek a permission and then only further take this officer into questioning. So we've now made it very clear to the banks saying, please go back. Look at all the cases. I've really given them this instruction saying, please go back, look at all the cases, and review if you want the CBI to come into this picture at all. And if you don't want to come, if you don't want CBI to come in, they wouldn't. It is only on your call do they come. That is one thing. And second, in many cases which have been hanging fire for a very long time, where the CBI is not even moving yet, the banks are well within their limit to review and take a call. So that exercise is already started. And I hope because of these, banks will have a greater sense of, no, I'm not going to be pulled up for genuine decisions. And therefore, that little doubt which was there in their mind should have really been removed. There was one small order which was issued sometime in 2016, I think, depending on the situation which arose at that time, where the Department of Financial Services in the Ministry of Finance had issued a note saying we would obviously hold the EDs and chairmen of banks liable if something majorly has gone wrong, given the kind of cases that all of us have been facing. That order of the Department of Financial Services also withdrawn. So I'm not sure, I'm quite open, even now I'm willing to hear the banks. I'm not sure if there's anything more left for me to prove that my intentions are not to follow or pursue bank officials. But of course, a lot is in their hands. They need not send it to the CBI if they think it's not worth sending it to the CBI. That initiative has been, was, and is today still with the banks only. The CBI does not appear in the bank's footsteps or at the door, or officials of banks suo motu.
Well, Ms. Sitharaman, according to the Ministry of External Affairs' own admission, 72 Indians facing charges of financial irregularities and fraud have fled the country since 2015. Does this record embarrass you? Because your government has said that it will go hammer and tongs at those who are looting India. That was the whole plank of the black money fight that you had. And with 72 Indians with such irregularities fleeing away from India under your government's watch, is that an embarrassing record?
I would put it like this. Till before that, they were happily in India. Once the heat was on, once they knew that the government was after them, they had no other way but probably get out of this country, which is not something which is going to give them the final answer. We are not going to stop pursuing the cases. We are not going to stop at anything else but get them back to the country to face the law of the land. So they may choose to run away from this country, but they can't run away from the Indian legal system.
Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, for a right-wing party which has a right-wing thinking, has the Rahul Gandhi suit boot jibe put you in a bit of a spot? Because ever since that jibe somewhere in 2015, the government seems to have changed its tack and gone leftwards in its policy making. Schemes that you put out and all the common people programs that you put out are more suitable to have been attached to a left-wing government than a right-wing party that thinks about market economy and the right of center economic policy.
Well, right of center economic policy is one thing, not in response to Soot Boot Sarkar allegation, but we do believe, and I keep saying this, Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyaya, who is a founder of the BJP, had used the word Antyodaya. And it is a stated commitment, and it's a very core principle for the BJP to work for the upliftment of the poor. Antyodaya, the last person who's there in the queue waiting for resources to reach him will have to be given an opportunity, and therefore I find it strange that any party which works particularly for free market when it addresses the issue of the poor, is suddenly painted pink and red. You're a communist, you're a socialist. Right wing, the so-called right wing, I don't even feel comfortable talking about left wing and right wing and center and all that, because even that is a very typically, the communist kind of an approach to who's where in ideology. But if you're looking at India, and if you're working for Indian entrepreneurial strength, and if you're helping Indian economy to be free of all those shackles that were brought in from the socialist era, you can't be doing it without obviously working for your own poor. So when we are talking about Antyodaya, as though it is only the socialists who take care of the poor, oh, you become socialist. So that whole domain being attributed to the socialists itself is absolutely incorrect. If you're attributing that to the socialists, you should also equally attribute killing of enterprise to the socialists. They completely suffocate entrepreneurship. No entrepreneurship can survive under socialist. It's been proven in the first 50 years of India. So when you equally want to identify, when you work for poor, it's becoming socialist. You also will have to say when you suffocate entrepreneurship, it is socialist. It's not done that way. So we do have a very strong commitment for working for the Antyodaya, and that's not a ideology borrowed from the socialist. It is very exclusively for us. Antyodaya is a matter of close monitoring and commitment. So,
Ms. Sitharaman, on a personal note, I want to ask you your experiences. You have been in North and South Bloc. You have been Raksha Mantri, and at that time, the biggest controversy to hit the country was the Rafale. Now, as Union Finance Minister, you are at the receiving end once again, especially from Mr. Rahul Gandhi, who questioned Rafale first, inside and outside the parliament, and now he's questioned every single statistic that comes out from the finance ministry saying base year is changed to show growth in a certain manner. So basically, to call a spade, basically calling you a fraud. How do you respond to that kind of criticism? Is there misogyny, or is this based on just political rivalry?
Actually, I find it very difficult to answer this question, because at what levels do you want us to answer? In the Rafale debate, repeatedly we kept putting on facts, but with no consideration whatever. No consideration whatsoever for the facts which were coming. Blatant abuses were thrown at the Prime Minister. And therefore, at that stage, you could only keep telling the facts, and, even media sometimes said, no, you're putting out facts that doesn't rise. Look at the strong objection the opposition has. Well, all right. We kept saying the facts, and the facts won, both in the court and also in the people's court during elections. Similarly now, you can have all kinds of abuses saying, Soot boot kar sarkar, your data is wrong. Soot boot ka sarkar? I'll give you just one example, and I'll not take the names of the companies involved in it. It was the Congress party when it was in power in Kerala. One of the potential big ports of the country, which is located in Kerala, to build it, not even through open tender or whatever. One of the big shipbuilding, whatever, big entrepreneur of this country was invited by the government of Kerala. That's not Soot boot. I'm not taking anybody's name, but it was a Congress government in Kerala which invited one of the biggest industry leaders of this country to say, come and please build that port for us. Has that ever come out through the media? Has that been used to ask the Congress?
Why are you pulling your punches?
Who is the Soot boot ka sarkar? You didn't even go through an open, transparent process. So, but when it is thrown at BJP, now BJP answer. Answer Rafale, answer data, answer anything else. Hey? And now, even Delhi's election, I'm being asked, your budget did not. consistent zero by Congress. No, BJP is routed. Routed is only when a party in power is thrown out. Even Reuters uses BJP is routed. What is this obsession? Pull us for the facts, but don't use us for baseless criticism. A party has never come back even to get one seat in Delhi is not being questioned. But you improve from 3 to 7 or 8 or whatever. Yes, it could have been much better. But the question is on BJP. I like the way all of you are obsessed and you like us. But somewhere.
Well, let's throw the house open for just 3 questions. 3 questions coming in. Okay, the gentleman here. 1 minute. Sir, 1 minute. Yeah. Can the mic be handed on?
Hello, ma'am.
No, the pink shirt here. The pink shirt here.
Hi, ma'am. My question is in respect to Andhra Pradesh. You are also the daughter-in-law of Andhra Pradesh. So I would like to ask you a specific question on what's going on in Andhra Pradesh and what Union Budget 2020 has in offering to Andhra Pradesh. You've seen the public debt is increasing day by day in Andhra. No new special things coming ahead. 2022 budget was a very flat budget as far as Andhra was concerned, in my personal opinion. Forget about the special
20?
status, 2020 budget, the recent budget. So forget about the special status, forget about the packages that were promised, but what special you feel that Andhra really deserves at this point in time to accelerate, because there are a lot of challenges that are coming up. The 3
All
capital-
right, she'll answer that question.
Thank you.
Well, the budget takes all India into picture. And every department, through every department, many things do come to the final consideration. So every such decision taken in the finance or in the budget has some impact or the other in every state. So it's not really most often driven by the fact of I have to do something for X state or Y state and therefore the budget has this. It goes through several processes. The states pass their proposals, the ministry concerned takes it up, then they look at the economic and the viability of the project, then the DFC is done, and that is where it enters into the budget. So, in fact, yesterday when I was in Kolkata, somebody asked, what has Kolkata got in this budget? So I don't look at it like, every city, every state. Many things which are done, for instance, if I'm doing better digital planning, and I'm saying every panchayat, in a panchayat, for instance, every post office, every primary health center, every school, every panchayat's office, every such common service centers will have optical fiber. It benefits every state. Like that in many of the projects, like for instance, 6,400 projects have been identified for the national infrastructure pipeline. Many are from Andhra too. They're going to get the money from us. They will get money from all other investments which are coming into the sovereign funds and others who are coming into the country, and so on. So states do get it like that, rather than from the state side for me to say, I've given this to Andhra, but not to anybody else.
Well, I have one question which on Twitter has been asked to you, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, and I want to ask you. Apart from the opposition's criticism, people are asking the question, is the BJP, as a political party, does it also have investigation agencies like the CBI, the Enforcement Directorate, and of course, income tax as the major arms of the government?
Well, they are the arms of the government.
And the party, politically?
Not at all. Not at all of the party. They are arms of the government.
But politically motivated cases which come up before elections and vanish after elections?
See, the grievance is no case vanishes. Once it comes, no case vanishes is the grievance. Close my case. If there's something, take me to court, or else close the case, is the normal argument. So no case vanishes once it's on the picture, but ideally there should be a time-bound way in which a case should be closed. But with all this said, if it is expected that because it shouldn't appear to be politically motivated, I shouldn't even pursue those genuinely sound prima facie evidence which demands that I act on them. That's also motivated. So if there is a genuine case where the prima facie is sound enough and which necessitates that there's some action taken, but because it may have a political fallout, am I being suggested that I don't even follow wrongdoers? That's not possible under Modi.
Well, just one last question. Is the Delhi election and the result a big setback for the BJP? You're losing state after state after state.
We've not lost Delhi. Delhi was with Aam Aadmi Party already. Losing state after state, what is that?
You put your entire might into this elections from Goli Maro to all MPs in Jhuggi Jhopdis and you still lost.
We give our best in every election. Every election, from panchayats to parliament, BJP takes its elections seriously because we also commit ourselves to work for the people. So we will naturally want their mandate too. But what is this losing state after state after state? We formed only recently government in Karnataka. Now, what is losing state after state? It is, if Aam Aadmi Party had lost it, you can say you've lost Delhi. They only kept the government which they had, they resumed. Like Modi has come with an increased mandate in Delhi.
ओवैसी साहब बैठे हैं, दिल्ली की हार शाहीन बाग की जीत है.
You should ask him rather than me.
You want to wriggle out of this one?
No, we've not, we've got more than, see, our vote share has not gone down. If anything, our vote share has gone up in Delhi. Our number of seats could have been much higher, never mind, but we've improved our score. We were not the government in Delhi, so where have we lost the elections? If our vote share has come down considerably, you ask me, to somewhat, some extent, Aam Aadmi Party's vote share has come down. I'm not saying that against them, but it's come down somewhat, but still they formed the government with good number. But where are we? We've improved our vote share, improved a little bit on our seats. Why is this piling on to BJP saying, what happened in Delhi, what happened? I mean, where is Congress also? Please find out. They supported everything to do with CAA. They wanted their vote bank politics to be intact. The vote bank politics they played in Delhi fully. Why didn't they get even one vote? Congress, please answer.
Well, that's a candid Nirmala Sitharaman, Finance Minister of India, the first full-time lady Finance Minister of India. Big round of applause. Not short of any answers anywhere. Always gritty and gutsy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, for joining us at the Times Now Summit.